People sleep on The Fog like it's just another ghost story, but it might be Carpenter's most atmospheric film. And yes, that includes Halloween. The mood, the music, the pacing, it's dread wrapped in a package of fog and revenge. I'm Brandy, otherwise known as the Terrorific Lady, and today we are going to be diving into this horror classic. Why it works, why it's still creepy, and why it deserves way more respect in the horror world. I want to give a quick shout out and thanks to everybody who's been supporting me on this retro horror school journey. It means the world to be able to talk about horror films, especially horror films laden with pirate ghosts and fog. Last retrospective was about a movie of John Carpenter's that is very well known and changed the slasher landscape. This retrospective is a movie that you may know about, you may not. It is John Carpenter's The Fog. And as a reminder of what a retrospective takes a look back at a movie, dissects it, and then talks about if it still has a place in horror today. To understand The Fog, we need to revisit the partnership of John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, the duo that is behind the success of Halloween. This film came about as part of a two-picture package deal with Avco Embassy, and with this deal, it brought the crew of Halloween back together, for the most part. The idea for The Fog came from a trip that Hill and Carpenter took to the United Kingdom.
We happened to be in Stonehenge. We were over in England and we took a trek down Stonehenge. Out in the distance, pulsating in the fields and in the bogs out there, was this fog bank, and it was pulsating as if there was something in it. And John said, "What do you think's in that, in that fog?"
It was a very overcast, kind of a typical British day, and there was a fog bank sitting out there, and it just seemed like a great eerie kind of situation.
Carpenter also insists that the story for The Fog has roots in actual events. The plot was based on a true incident in California up the coast by Santa Barbara. In Goleta, California, in the 1700s, there was a ship coming in with gold on it, and they put out a fire to guide the ship, but they put out a phony fire, and it ran out on the rocks so they could rob it. We had a bunch of pirates, but there was a little truth in it. This injustice, coupled with Carpenter's fascination with classic horror and classic horror movies, began to merge into the atmosphere that would make up The Fog. Carpenter drew inspiration from a variety of different sources for The Fog. He cited inspirations such as EC Comics' Tales from the Crypt, particularly their ghost stories and tales of Grand Guignol. Guignol. Bleh. I can't pronounce that word, I'm sorry. Carpenter also listed the 1958 horror film The Crawling Eye as an inspiration because of the monsters crawling out of and hiding in the clouds. So, in a sense, he had all those inspirations, and he also wanted to make The Fog kind of like an old-time classic Hammer horror film. Cinematically, the film was also influenced by such movies as The Thing from Another World, which came out in 1951. It Came from Outer Space, which came out in 1953. Quatermass 2, which came out in 1957, and Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, which came out in 1963. But beyond these classics and inspirations, there is another less obvious set of films that may have left their imprint on The Fog's inspiration. Writer-director Armando de Osorio's Blind Dead films. This classic Spanish horror series consisted of 4 films that were released from 1971 to around 1975. And it tells the story of Satan-worshipping Templar knights. And they scare the crap out of this small town when they begin taking and sacrificing local village girls. And so the townsfolk, they perform just this little vigilante justice on these knights, but because these knights are of supernatural origin, they just return centuries later, I guess, to the same town to continue what they started. Some feel that these films influence The Fog first when you look at the Templars themselves. They resemble the ghosts in The Fog. They're a group of many and they move very, very slowly. And there's a few more little things that you could look at and be like, yep, these movies helped inspire The Fog. In the first sequel, Return of the Evil Dead, there's a town celebration presided over by the mayor, just like there's a town celebration presided over by the mayor in The Fog. And all of the main characters of that movie, they take refuge from the Templars inside an old church. Sound familiar? In the second sequel, titled Ghost Galleon, the Templars stalk their victims aboard an old creepy ship that is covered in fog. And the last sequel is 1975's Night of the Seagulls, which contains a seaside village, a lot of atmosphere, and once again, fog. Now, what do you think about these movies from hearing about them, or if you've even seen them? Do you think that they helped to inspire The Fog? With these inspirations, Carpenter and Hill started to craft a tale centered around a small town with a dark secret and a dark past. Like all of John Carpenter's plots, this one is also very simple and straightforward. This is a Carpenter trademark. The Fog tells the story of the small town of Antonio Bay, a seaside community that is plagued with, well, I like to call pirate ghosts on the 100th anniversary. But these are not just pirate ghosts. They might not even be pirates. I just call them that. They're revenge ghosts, and these ghosts want the lives of the 6 descendants of the town's founders who let them die. If I was those ghosts, I'd be pissed too. The plot is founded on 2 things, revenge and murder. So the overall tone of the movie indeed matches the plot. It is creepy, dark, and almost secretive. Notice that there are certain characters, like the priest, that are hidden or filmed in the shadows. If something's in the shadows, that means it's hidden and it needs to come out into the light, which goes well with the main overarching theme of this movie, which is secrets. Secrets and how they can destroy people, especially the innocents, such as the 6 descendants, which had nothing to do, with how these ghosts died. It's the phrase, the sins of the father, comes to mind. So the sins of their descendants, these ghosts have come to collect their payment, their spiritual payment. Also, one of the other themes is celebrating colonization, celebrating this 100-year anniversary without knowing the origins behind the town, or the blood that was shed, or the murder that happened there.
Our celebration tonight is a travesty. We're honoring murderers.
Now, the music is another Carpenter trademark. It was very simple, and it used synths. And I don't know how long it took to record the Fog score, because I looked and looked and looked, and it didn't say. With Halloween, 3 to 4 days. With The Fog, it is unspecified, but the music is nonetheless very fitting. And to bring this unsettling plot and vision and theme and tone of this movie to life, Carpenter once again assembled a talented cast and crew. The Fog was shot over a period of 30 days from March to April of 1979. And it used as locations the coastal vibe of California, including the towns of Inverness, Point Reyes Station, Bodega Bay, and various spots around Los Angeles and the San Fernando Valley. And a fun little aside, which kind of adds to the atmosphere here, production began on a full moon, And it ended on a full moon. The fog itself also set the tone because Carpenter's vision for this movie was very clear. He didn't want this movie to be about 100% gore and slashing and hacking. And for this, he relied on the fog. So the fog wasn't just something that was there. Carpenter called it its own character, its own force of evil. And the fog hammered the point home, and the point that he wanted to portray was that you are just people in general tend to be more scared of the unknown or what they can't see.
When we talked about the fog, we wanted it to be sort of a character. And how to create it, giving it a sense of life, giving it the ability to move sort of consciously.
It's almost like a wall across the east end of town.
It had to be sinister and contain an evil force.
The cast of this film included Hal Holbrook, Tom Atkins, Adrienne Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis, Nancy Loomis, Charles Cyphers, and Janet Leigh. This marked Tom Atkins' first collaboration with Carpenter. If you remember, you see him again in 1981's Escape from New York. And this was Adrienne Barbeau's big screen debut. She was doing a lot of television at the time, and Carpenter was also married to her at the time, and he wrote the part of Stevie Wayne especially for her. And the role helped launch Barbeau's career and also her status as a horror icon. So after The Fog, she went to star in Wes Craven's Swamp Thing, George A. Romero's Creepshow, and Two Evil Eyes. And many of the ghosts were played by the crew. Grips and even Tommy Lee Wallace was a ghost. Wallace doubled as both the production designer and the editor on this film. And the lead ghost, Blake, was played by Rob Bottin, a name you very much recognize as he went on to collaborate with Carpenter on the special effects for The Thing. Carpenter even gave himself a cameo, which was his first and last acting role in one of his films because he thought he sucked.
I'm all through, Father. Oh, thank you, Bennett. I won't need you until 4 tomorrow, Bennett. Yes, sir. Would you like something to keep you warm on the way home? No, thank you. Father, can I get paid? Why don't you come in at 6 instead of 4?
So the only exception that he's had to this rule is that he's had walk-on roles in his films, and he even played a dead guy, a corpse, in Body Bags. Despite the talent involved, The Fog was still a small independent production. Depending on where you look, it had a budget of around $900,000 to $1 million. David Cronenberg's Scanners was released around that time. And after seeing what was done in Scanners was a little bit more gory, a little bit more graphic. Carpenter decided they had to up the ante just a little bit in The Fog and add a few of those kinds of elements. So they added a few more scares and did a few more reshoots, which pushed the budget up to $1.1 million. And they had to hustle, of course, to get it all finished in time. Even with a tight budget, Carpenter wanted the movie to look very polished and cinematic. So he shot the film in anamorphic widescreen Panavision, which is a ratio of 2.35 to 1, and that helped it to give that very expansive theatrical feel.
I think the use of the anamorphic Panavision widescreen format is something that John really insisted on. And when you have very, very little money and you're composing for this huge widescreen, it actually looks like you have a bigger than life movie.
Between the cinematography, the creepy atmosphere, and the practical effects, The Fog seemed to have everything, all the ingredients, to make an awesome movie just right from the get-go. When Carpenter sat down to watch the first cut of the movie, he thought that something was missing. He thought that something was off. He felt just things weren't landing or falling into place the way they were supposed to, and that's when things started to get challenging. If you like this retrospective so far, give this video a like and hit subscribe. It helps the channel grow and it lets me keep diving into more awesome horror movies like this. Okay, back to the ghosts. As I mentioned, Carpenter was not satisfied with the first cuts of the movie. He thought it wasn't scary enough. And he felt that the story didn't make a whole lot of sense as it was. So he and Hill made the very bold decision to reshoot about 1/3 of the entire movie. They added scenes with a little bit more gore in them, like the multiple murders aboard the Seagrass. They amped up the shocks a little bit, such as Jamie Lee Curtis being scared out of her wits by a corpse in the locker, and then again in the morgue. Poor Jamie, she just keeps getting assaulted by all these corpses. They also filled in narrative gaps with a little bit more dialogue, such as that infamous campfire scene with the ghost story told by John Houseman.
11:55. Almost midnight. Enough time for one more story. One more story before 12. Just to keep us warm.
And much of the dialogue between Nancy Loomis, Hal Holbrook, and Janet Leigh in the church. Deborah Hill even shot new inserts herself, like the possession montage of Antonio Bay that is used with the opening credits. So that creepy mood that you feel right from the start, that is all Deborah Hill. Part of setting that mood was also the fog, but getting the fog to do what they wanted and getting it to look just right was not easy.
On set or around the actors coming down the street, you have what are foggers. I mean, these big machines, and they put out all this fog, and I asked our effects guy, Dick Albane, what's your secret ingredient? He says it's called fog juice.
And if you've ever played around a movie set and watched the special effects guys doing their fog machines, either the great big ones or the little bitty foofers, it's just sort of, and it goes like that and it goes away. So try controlling that.
Deborah Hill said they used 3 methods to create it: dry ice, fog machines, and a third one she doesn't even remember. Probably because some of it was real fog that was captured in the shots that they took around Point Reyes. Mother Nature was helping them out with the special effects, but she was not always a kind one. Carpenter got seasick when filming the boat scenes with Tom Atkins and Jamie Lee Curtis, and he later on called it one of the worst shooting days of his career. He didn't mention this about being one of the worst days of his career, but this scene was a little tricky to shoot and once again involved that wacky fog. Stevie Wayne alone at the top of the White House as the fog pulls back to sea, except that's not how it happened. Carpenter shot the entire scene in reverse.
What they needed to do in that scene is that I was surrounded by fog, and suddenly the fog disappears. But they could blow the fog in, but they couldn't get it out. So John came to me and he said, look, we have to act this scene in reverse, and then I'm going to print it backwards. And he said, the one thing you have to do, aside from getting all the emotions in reverse, is you have to be careful when you blink, because blinking shows up on camera. When we do this technique, it'll look weird.
The Fog first arrived in theaters on February 1st, 1980, and it met with a mixed critical reception. Even though it grossed $21 million at the box office, which is considered a financial success, critics like Vincent Canby said the movie was constructed just with random diversions, and Roger Ebert said the film's idea just did not work out. And they compared it to Halloween, some critics did, saying it lacked the suspense, shock, and drive of that movie. And others thought the plot to be lacking in depth. Roger Ebert further wrote in his reviews of the movie that he felt that the plot ideas just did not work out, and it must have seemed like an inspired idea to make a horror movie in which clouds of fog would be the menace, but the idea just doesn't work out. This isn't a great movie, but it shows great promise from Carpenter. But The Fog was praised for its practical effects. The use of physical props and solely practical effects and makeup, as opposed to just using CGI, added to the film's authenticity and impact. Despite the initial critical response, The Fog did receive some recognition. It was nominated for a Saturn Award for Best Horror Film, and rightfully so. It has this blend of horror and suspense that makes it a standout in the horror genre. The Fog's success solidified Carpenter as a prominent figure in the horror genre. His ability to create atmosphere, tension, and above all, fear, it really resonated with people. And still does today. There was mixed critical reviews. There was also some mixed audiences reviews, even though it was a financial success. Over time, people have reevaluated the movie, and it eventually became a cult classic. I like to call Carpenter the cult classic director because that's where a lot of his films ended up as cult classics. During an interview for The Fog, John had this to say.
I'm conscious of the press, but I don't make movies for them. I don't make movies to get good reviews. I think that's dangerous.
And his commitment to this shows in The Fog, because you can really sniff it out if someone is trying to make a film to 100% appease the critics and the reviewers. With this film, he is definitely not. He wanted to take his audience along for the ride. He wanted to challenge himself to see if he could scare the audience without a ton of gore and violence. And even though there is no iconic killer in this film like in Halloween, I think this film stands out because of that. It stands out because there isn't a slasher killer who is human like Michael Myers. The killers are a supernatural fog that hides these evil supernatural ghosts. It was a ghost story that was sandwiched in between slashers and right when the slasher boom was about ready to take off. So yes, it came out at a weird time, but it is unique in that it stands out from all the 80s slashers of the day. Looking at this film's horror DNA and blueprint, it's like a lot of his other films. One theme really sticks out, and that is the theme of isolation. The characters all end up in this old church, trapped and away from the town or people that could help them. Thinking of the movie The Fog and its themes and Carpenter's style and trademark, in what other films of his do you see themes or tones such as isolation? Isolation is a big thing with John Carpenter. So which of his other films deal with the overall theme of isolation? The Fog may not have been a slasher film, but it definitely left its mark on the horror genre even 45 years later. Whenever I talk about The Fog, whether it's on Instagram or it's on social media, I don't really hear a lot of bad things said about it. That the worst thing that I've heard said about it by somebody is that they think it's boring. No, which is perfectly fine. I mean, but I don't often hear a bad word said about The Fog. People love the overall tone, they love the overall atmosphere. So the very much slow burn build of tension and dread. And those kinds of movies still have a place in the horror genre. They are still being made today. So this movie, I think you could pluck it from 1980 and you could fit it in now times, and I think it would still fit. I first saw this movie, I'm trying to remember. I think it was about 2, 3 years ago. I always had a hard time finding it on streaming, but one day I finally did, watched it, can't get enough of it. Don't have a lot of bad things to say about The Fog. It definitely has its place in horror today. The Fog doesn't outright scream at you like a lot of other horror movies. It creeps in slow, has a slow, steady pacing, takes his time, and scares the daylights out of you that way. It's a ghost story for sure, but underneath it all, it's about guilt, corruption, and payback. Classic John Carpenter. Thank you so much for watching this retrospective on The Fog, and a big thank you to everybody who's been supporting me, whether you're brand new or whether you've been on this roller coaster ride for a while. I appreciate every like, every comment, every subscription. I'll have more John Carpenter horror retrospectives coming your way, but until then, class is dismissed, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Bye!